Karen plugged her pool heater into my shed, so I turned her hot tub into a cold plunge from hell. George Abbott had lived through desert monsoons, faulty transformers, and a failed solar array, but nothing made him sit up at 2 a.m. quite like the low, humming whisper of electricity being stolen. The house was still, the kind of deep, velvet silence only found in the Arizona night. George's eyes flicked toward the glowing screen across the room. A pale blue pulse on his wall-mounted energy monitor had shifted. A blip. Minor. But wrong. He rubbed his hands down his flannel sleep shirt and rose without urgency, more curiosity than concern. Years ago, when he still wore steel-toed boots and climbed poles before sunrise, George could pick up on voltage drops like a bloodhound on scent. Even now, well into retirement and more accustomed to coffee mugs than circuit boards, the instinct hadn't dulled. Every morning after feeding the birds, he checked the logs. It was habit, not paranoia, or so he told himself. Tonight's anomaly wasn't just a flicker. Between 1:45 and 2:10 a.m., his solar-fed subpanel registered a drain of 1.8 kilowatt-hours, like someone had siphoned gas from a locked tank. George stared at the readout. No HVAC, no irrigation timers, no battery cycling. His grid was designed for balance. This wasn't balance. He slipped on a pair of house shoes and fetched the old metal flashlight he'd bought at a Sears that didn't exist anymore. The air outside clung to his skin, 93 degrees, dry but persistent. The desert never really cooled off in June. George made his way along the side yard, careful not to trip over the ceramic frog that doubled as a sprinkler control cover. Gravel crunched softly under his feet. He paused behind his tool shed, nostrils flaring. There, beneath the faint smell of mesquite and lawn fertilizer, was the unmistakable bite of heated chlorine. He swung the flashlight beam upward. There it was, an orange extension cord, thick and newer than anything George owned, looped carefully over the wooden fence like it had been placed with intention. Not tossed, not forgotten, positioned. It disappeared behind his shed wall where he knew, with certainty, no active outlets remained. He didn't speak, didn't curse, just stood there, letting the silence settle into his lungs. Back inside, George poured himself 3 fingers of cold water from the ceramic jug in his fridge and sat at the kitchen table. He opened his tablet and queued up the motion-triggered feeds. The birdhouse cam along the back fence caught a subtle shift at 1:47 a.m. A quick hand, a cord flipped, a figure ducking away. He paused the video, rewound, watched again. It was fast, blurry, but there. The smart meter confirmed the power draw came from the outdoor circuit labeled South Shed Legacy, one he hadn't used since his grandson's science fair project 3 years ago. The line was inactive, disconnected from any current use. Or so he thought. George stared at the numbers a long moment, then saved the data and backed it up to a flash drive he labeled June, Night 1. His hands moved smoothly, calmly, as if preparing blueprints for a client he didn't have anymore. When the sky began to bleach from black to deep violet, George changed into khaki shorts and a cotton polo, padded to the porch, and flipped open the Arizona Daily Star. A rabbit darted across the gravel lawn next door. Across the street, Mr. Patel was already outside watering succulents, his broad-brimmed hat bobbing gently as he waved with a free hand. George lifted his coffee cup in return. The ceramic mug was warm, comforting, etched with the faded logo of a tech expo from 1997. The HOA newsletter sat half-folded in his mailbox. He left it there. George took another sip, eyes fixed across the yard. Karen's hot tub, shielded by a string of solar fairy lights and an embarrassingly tall privacy hedge, let out a long, mechanical sigh and bubbles to life. Karen answered the door in lemon-colored yoga pants, sunglasses too large for her face, and a mimosa at 10:15 a.m., like she hosted brunch for royalty. George shifted slightly on her brick step, tugging his polo away from his damp back. The Arizona sun had already baked the concrete under his sandals, and the citrusy sweet perfume drifting from Karen's foyer was cloying in the heat. "Well, good morning, George," she said, voice lilting with an exaggerated brightness that made his molars ache. "Can I help you with something?" "I hope so," he said, keeping his tone measured. "I noticed an orange extension cord. Looked like it ran over from your side of the fence to behind my shed." Karen sipped from her glass and tilted her head. "Oh, that. Yeah, we figured you wouldn't mind. You've got solar, right? George blinked. Yes, I do. But that's still my circuit. It's private use. She gave a little shrug and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was just a little juice. Our pool heater was acting up, and the garage outlet's been wonky for weeks. Honestly, I didn't think it was a big deal. We figured it'd be temporary. George paused. You didn't ask. Karen laughed, a short, dismissive burst. Relax. You're such a tech guy. It's not like we were draining your car battery or anything. He nodded once, lips pressed in a thin line. Right. Have a good day. As he walked back to his own house, he could still hear her wind chime tinkling behind him. Each note felt like a little shove between the shoulders. Later that afternoon, he sat in his workshop, the hum of the ceiling fan blending with the soft jazz he kept playing from an old radio. He uploaded the screenshots from his security camera, annotated the timestamps, and printed off a usage chart from his monitor. He slipped the pages into a plain manila envelope and drove down to the HOA office. The building sat between the dental clinic and a dry cleaner, in a tan complex that looked like it had been poured from the same mold as every other HOA office in the state. Inside, the air conditioner worked overtime, rattling faintly in the ceiling tiles. Janice sat behind the front desk, her glasses resting low on her nose as she typed into a desktop so old it still had a CD tray. Hi, George, she said, a little surprised. Everything all right? He handed over the envelope. I'd like to file a formal complaint. Unauthorized electrical use. She opened the folder, eyes widening slightly as she flipped through the contents. You've got charts. I like charts, George said simply. Janice gave a small smile and nodded. I'll pass this along to the board. Brenda's out today, but I'll make sure it gets logged. 3 days passed. On the fourth morning, George found a cream-colored envelope in his mailbox, sealed with the embossed logo of the Cotton Hollow HOA. The wording was carefully indirect, but the message clear: unneighborly behavior, unauthorized modifications, and a vague warning about creating unsafe conditions near property lines. He read it twice, then tucked it under a paperweight shaped like a mini turbine blade. By sunset, George had pulled out his old drafting table and unrolled a blueprint from a storage tube marked Backup Microgrid, Regional Clinic, 2007. He traced a finger over an outdated circuit route, smiled faintly, and pulled over a blank grid. The next day, he stopped by the Copper Cup for his usual black coffee. Tom behind the counter handed it over without asking. As George stirred in exactly 1 sugar, he overheard 2 ladies at a side booth murmuring about that situation with Karen. She always gets away with everything, one of them said, shaking her head. George sipped, adjusted his ball cap, and walked out into the hot morning sun. Back in his shed, he cleared the bench and placed a worn leather notebook at the center. He flipped to a fresh page and labeled it with clean, square letters. Defense Grid, Cotton Hollow. The camera logs were sorted, the wiring plan revised, the old outlet schematic redrawn. As he reached for his favorite drafting pencil, a thought crossed his mind. What kind of system would a thief not see coming? George sat down at his workbench, rolled out blueprints, and muttered, All right then, let's make something memorable. Some men set mouse traps. George Abbott rigged a GFCI outlet to trip at exactly 2.9 kilowatts, with a warning light shaped like a garden gnome. The gnome sat quietly in the corner of the backyard, tucked between a barrel cactus and the gravel path, one ceramic eye slightly chipped. No one would suspect it was wired. George had hollowed out the base, installed a voltage logger, and routed its sensor directly through a low-voltage Wi-Fi transmitter that fed data to his private home server. It was harmless to humans, pets, and even raccoons, but not to overzealous extension cords. He remembered the long hours wiring surge protection for military installations, critical redundancy, triple fusing, fail-safes on fail-safes. He used to joke with clients that he could fry a charging station or make it dance, depending on their budget. This time, it wasn't about specs or invoices. It was about precision and dignity. The dummy outlet he built was placed deliberately low on the shed's outer panel, its faceplate dull and slightly rusted to appear neglected. Behind it, George had routed the wires through a smart trip circuit designed to detect any load over 2.9 kilowatts. The real artistry, though, was the decoy extension cord. Heavy, orange, coiled carelessly over the back fence like he'd been lazy after a yard project. It wasn't plugged into anything useful. Instead, it looped directly into the surge loop, hiding its secret in plain sight. His backyard remained the picture of restraint. Gravel in tidy rows, native succulents in weathered clay pots, a hummingbird feeder near the window that hadn't moved since last season. But inside the workshop, it was a different world. Circuits taped to foam board, schematic overlays pinned to cork, notes in blocky engineer's handwriting across a worn drafting mat. His soldering iron clicked softly in its cradle. Every tool had a place, every wire a reason. On the second night, nothing happened. He waited, watching the data stream flick by, sipping decaf and adjusting thresholds on the logging software. But on the third night, at precisely 2:17 a.m., the logger chirped. A short alert flashed across the top corner of the server screen. Surge event detected, 2.97 kilowatts, shed outlet. He tapped into the GNOME cam feed. In grainy infrared, the cord visibly tightened as weight was applied. A soft spark bloomed behind the outlet cover, followed by a brief flicker in the image. Then the audio kicked in, a faint sputtering sound, a rising hum, and finally a mechanical cough from over the fence. George switched feeds. The second camera, hidden behind a trellis near the fence line, captured a burst of steam from Karen's hot tub. Its jets stopped mid-cycle, the LED lights flickered and died. Smoke rose lazily from the rear casing of a mounted control unit. Moments later, Karen's teenage son came stumbling into view, barefoot and shirtless, wearing red boxers, and holding his phone like a lantern. He hovered over the power cord, clearly baffled, then yanked it free and looked around as if expecting someone to shout. No one did. George leaned back in his chair. The footage auto-saved, cross-referenced the timestamp with the meter log, and uploaded both to cloud storage. The labels were meticulous. June 17_event 2. He created backups on 2 flash drives, one of which he slid into a small, velvet-lined case tucked in his desk drawer labeled, if necessary. The following morning, the neighborhood looked as it always had. Quiet, trimmed lawns, sleepy sidewalks. But George noticed a change. Karen's backyard, usually glowing with ambient lighting by 7 a.m., was dark. The cord was gone, the hot tub covered. A suspicious silence hovered just behind the fence. George stood at his kitchen window, the early light filtering through gauzy curtains. His kettle whistled gently behind him. He poured into a chipped mug, the one with a faded hummingbird etched on the side, and stepped outside. The sun was low, the breeze mild, and the desert still sleepy. He brought the mug to his lips, paused, and whispered, "Phase 1 complete." The second time her pool heater fizzled out, Karen shrieked like someone had sunk her yacht in a birdbath. The screech echoed over the fence just after 2 in the morning, slicing through the desert stillness like a rusty gate hinge. George didn't flinch. He was already up, seated in front of his server monitor, tea in hand, watching the feed in real time. The screen lit up with a sharp voltage spike, followed by a clean drop, just as planned. This time, the logger caught everything from 3 angles. The birdhouse camera captured Karen's son tiptoeing around the backyard with the extension cord coiled like a python over his shoulder. The second camera, mounted discreetly behind a clay pot on George's side, caught the plug-in sequence and the surge moment, the flash, the pop, the flicker of shorted circuitry. The third camera, newly installed on a neighbor's tree facing the back alley, recorded the panicked rush of lights dimming in the house next door. George didn't smile. Not quite. But he did exhale with the slow satisfaction of someone who'd just proven a theory for the second time. By mid-morning, the heat was climbing toward 95, and a new player entered the drama, the fire marshal. George watched from behind his front curtains as a white city pickup pulled into Karen's driveway. Karen stood outside in floral sandals and oversized sunglasses, gesturing wildly, a tarp thrown hastily over the back corner where the pool pump sat half exposed. George waited for a knock on his own door. It never came. Instead, he headed down the block with his coffee thermos and a neutral expression. He didn't bring up the incident. He didn't need to. Later that day, at the Copper Cup, George stirred his black coffee slowly as Mr. Patel leaned across the table. You ever have your freezer thaw out and not realize it until the milk smells like a tire? Patel asked in his usual low murmur. George blinked, then nodded. You too. It happened last week. Early morning, maybe. I thought it was just the heat kicking something out of balance. George reached into his canvas bag and pulled out a small tablet. He queued up a silent clip, Karen's son, the same clumsy midnight choreography with the cord, this time visible sneaking through the fence gap between the yards. Mr. Patel narrowed his eyes. That's bold. And not a one-time thing, George said. Later that week, while walking home from the diner, George spotted Tom and Susan Parker pruning a hedge along their driveway. Susan waved, then hesitated. "Hey, George," she called, brushing sweat from her brow. "You ever notice your porch lights flicker late at night?" George stopped. "How late?" "Like 2 a.m. kind of late," Tom added. "And it's not the bulb. We replaced them last month." George didn't say anything at first. He simply pulled out his phone and showed them a snapshot. A frame from the motion camera feed of Karen's son, crouched behind their utility box with an all-too-familiar orange cable in hand. Tom's eyebrows lifted. Susan put a hand to her mouth. "No way," she whispered. "She's been using our power?" "For her pool setup, heater, hot tub. Take your pick," George replied. Rosa Medina joined the group a few minutes later, walking her dog. When she heard what had happened, her face tightened. She asked if she could plug in her phone charger at my patio outlet during that block party last month. Rosa said slowly. "Next day, my garden lights wouldn't work." The conversation shifted. First suspicion, then recognition. One by one, they began connecting dots. Susan looked around at the small gathering forming on the sidewalk. "You know what we need?" she said. "We need a place to share this stuff. Quietly. Just neighbors. Just facts. Something discreet," Patel nodded. "Not public." "I can host it," George said. "Encrypted drive, private logins. Nothing too fancy." Tom smirked. "You're talking about a neighborhood support group for power theft?" Susan smiled. "We're talking about accountability." They mulled over names as they sipped cold drinks under Rosa's carport. Eventually, someone suggested it. "What's the problem?" There was a pause. And then, laughter. By sunset, George had started setting up the group chat and a secure drive folder. Patel promised to dig up his freezer's diagnostic logs. Rosa offered to recheck her light timers. Tom said he'd help gather copies of utility bills if people wanted to cross-reference usage. The community, once quiet and fragmented, was beginning to hum with purpose. Back in his living room, George transferred the latest surge footage to his archive. The file blinked on his screen as it copied. Tom leaned over George's laptop and mutters, "If this is what I think it is, we're going to need more USB drives." The HOA meeting started with lemonade, pie, and passive-aggressive smiles. Typical. It didn't stay that way. The Cotton Hollow clubhouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and overripe strawberries. Folding chairs squeaked as retirees shifted to find the least uncomfortable position. Brenda Kirkland, president of the HOA and self-styled gatekeeper of community harmony, stood at the front beneath a sagging patriotic banner that had survived 3 summers and at least 1 angry bird. "All right, folks," she began, wrapping a plastic spoon against her water glass. "Let's begin with old business, yard decoration compliance, and irrigation scheduling." George sat near the back, his laptop bag at his feet, a neat stack of USB drives tucked into a side pocket. His expression was patient, unreadable. Around him sat Tom and Susan Parker, Mr. Patel, Rosa Medina, and a few others whose curiosity had outgrown their politeness. Karen arrived 10 minutes late in a coral sundress, oversized sunglasses still perched dramatically on her head despite the fluorescent lighting. She swept into the front row with practiced grace, offering air kisses to no one in particular. George noted the slight hitch in her step when she passed Janice, who barely glanced up from the attendance sheet. Brenda droned on about mailbox paint colors and compost bin violations. Karen offered the occasional nod, the smile on her lips sharp as the glitter on her nails. When Brenda finally paused for open floor time, George stood. "Madam Chair," he said, "I'd like to raise an issue of neighborhood infrastructure misuse. I have supporting documentation to distribute." Karen turned, already smirking. "Oh, for heaven's sake." Brenda blinked, caught off guard. Go ahead, Mr. Abbott." George handed out the USB drives in orderly fashion. Janice, without being asked, retrieved the ancient projector from the closet and set it on the central table. George powered it on, waited for the flicker, and gave it the necessary 2 taps on the side. The machine groaned into life. "Over the past month," George said, calm and measured, Several residents have experienced unexplained power losses, freezers resetting, garden lights flickering, porch outlets tripping. He clicked to the first slide, a simple graph showing kilowatt draws against time of night. This data, he continued, was collected from my own smart grid system and later corroborated with other neighbors. Karen gave a dramatic sigh. This is absurd. George didn't flinch. I've also compiled footage. The timestamps match exactly with the anomalies. The projector shifted to grainy night footage. Karen's son, barefoot, hoodie up, orange cord in hand, crept into one yard, then another. Plug, uncoil, vanish. The room fell into a heavy silence broken only by the whirring fan above Brenda's head. Karen shot to her feet. This is harassment. My son, he was retrieving a dropped ball. You have no right. George advanced to the next slide. Stills of the hot tub, the garden lights, the frayed cords. All time-coded. Then, a list, HOA bylaws, specifically 8B and 12C. Unauthorized access to personal utilities, tampering with private property. None of this is speculative, he said. It's recorded, documented, and logged. I've submitted backup copies to the HOA's private drive. Brenda's face was tight, her fingers laced in front of her. Karen, did you know your son was accessing other homes' power supplies? Karen's expression crumpled briefly before rebuilding itself in high gloss. This is a coordinated attack. They're just mad because I've been active in the HOA. They're mad because you stole from them, Susan said sharply. Rosa added, and you lied about it. Mr. Patel simply raised a hand and asked, may I move that we suspend Karen's voting privileges and committee involvement pending a formal review? Brenda froze. For a long, brittle moment, the room was a tableau of heat, tension, and clipped breath. Seconded, someone said from the back. Brenda looked at Janice, then at the silent crowd. She cleared her throat. All in favor. Hands went up, one after another, after another. Karen's lips parted, but no words came. She stormed out, heels striking the linoleum like gunshots. The door shut behind her with a rattle. The meeting staggered on, but the temperature had shifted. Quiet nods were exchanged. Cups refilled. A few people murmured about, always wondered about her lights. As the meeting wraps, George is approached by 3 more neighbors. We think she did the same thing at our place. Karen's backyard was finally quiet. No humming motors, no neon lights, no late-night Whirlpool concerts. It was the stillness that struck George the most. For weeks, Cotton Hollow had hummed with an undercurrent of tension, but now even the cicadas seemed to time their chirps with care. The oppressive July heat settled over the neighborhood like a thick wool blanket, but George's front porch remained a haven of quiet industry, succulents thriving in terracotta pots, a modest tomato vine curling up a bamboo trellis, and a small box fan buzzing contentedly near his elbow. He leaned back in his chair, a mug of lukewarm coffee balanced on the armrest, and listened. Not a hum, not a splash, just the distant bark of a dog and the occasional whir of someone's AC kicking on. The hot tub was gone. So were the string lights and the inflatable loungers and the garish flamingo that once guarded Karen's patio like a lawn sentinel. In their place sat silence and a half-empty planter. George didn't gloat. Not really. He just tended his tomatoes and enjoyed the breeze from the fan. Tom and Rosa stopped by later that morning. Tom carried a small toolkit, Rosa a bag of tamper-proof outlet covers. George had already prepped the wiring diagrams on his workshop table. Figure while we're all updating, Tom said, wiping sweat from his brow. Might as well make sure no one else gets any bright ideas. George smiled. Glad to help. By noon, Tom's back patio had 2 new outlets wired and sealed. Rosa's irrigation box had a new circuit lock, and George's smart monitor hummed with healthy, consistent output. No spikes. No dips. Just clean, honest current. At the next HOA bulletin board update, a new flyer appeared in place of the usual bake sale notice. Charter amendment passed, unauthorized utility access defined and enforceable. Beneath it, smaller print. All shared boundaries require visible, code-compliant installations. Random audits may occur. Gwen, the new HOA president, dropped by unannounced the following Tuesday. A retired firefighter with a clipboard and a famously bad poker face. She stood by George's front gate and waved. We're forming an infrastructure oversight team, she said. George chuckled. Let me guess, you want me on it. She smiled. Not unless you want to be. But if we run into another surge issue, I'd sleep easier knowing we've got someone with your eye. I'll consult, George said. But don't make me wear a name tag. Deal. That Friday, tucked inside his mailbox beneath the circular for the upcoming chili cook-off, George found a simple cream envelope. Inside was a small card with "Thank you" embossed in silver. The handwriting was neat but hesitant. For keeping things running, Janice. It was unsigned otherwise. He tucked it into a drawer beside his electrical schematics. A few days later, while adjusting his tomato supports, he noticed Karen standing just at the edge of his yard, clutching a wide-brimmed hat in both hands. She looked smaller, somehow, not just physically, but in the way someone does when they finally understand they're no longer the center of the room. She didn't have her sunglasses. Her voice was quiet. "I didn't think it would matter," she said. George didn't look up from the vine he was twisting. "It always matters when you take what's not yours." She nodded once, then turned and walked away. George didn't watch her leave. That night, the sky burned a soft orange as the sun slipped behind the mountains. George checked his monitor one last time before bed, flatline. No draw, no noise, just the soft click of the fan turning in the window. George checked his smart meter, 0.0 drain, just the way he likes it. He smiles and goes back to pruning his tomato vines. After all the noise and sparks, Cotton Hollow settled into a gentler rhythm, one shaped not by wires and circuits, but by quiet glances and newfound trust. Sometimes, the biggest victories don't come with applause, but with silence. When the lights stay on, the air stays cool, and the current runs clean. It wasn't just about electricity. It was about respect, about knowing where your fence ends and your neighbor's begins. And like a well-tended garden or a steady current, peace takes work, but once it flows, it nourishes more than just the soil.